Hey everyone, and welcome to the very first Ask a Mentor with All Tech is Human. Really thrilled to have one of All Tech is Human's favorites who's participated in a few of our projects that we've had. So fortunate to bring Renee Cummings back, who is an AI ethicist and also a data activist, the data activist in residence at the University of Virginia. So we're going to ask Renee all about this, but as a little bit of housekeeping, All Tech is Human, we are based here in Manhattan. We're a nonprofit that's focused on building the responsible tech pipeline, making it more diverse, multidisciplinary, and aligned with the public interest. We tend to be a connective tissue that brings together multiple stakeholders across civil society, government, and industry. Recently, our organization started a responsible tech mentorship program that right now has 222 mentees in it and a bunch of mentors that we're currently building out the infrastructure of setting up, and thought that this would be a great way of really getting started with and continued mentorship. One of the things that we've noticed and why we brought on Renee for our discussion, for our 45 minutes together for this AMA style video conversation, is that this is still a nascent space, right? We're focused on responsible tech, which is reducing the harms of technology, diversifying the tech pipeline, and also ensuring that technology is aligned with the public interest. This still seems to be a space where there's a lot of confusion, a lot of questions around how to get more involved. What's the career track? If I wanted one of these careers like Renee has, how do you get this career? How much schooling do you need? Where do you go? Where do you go to upskill? So that's what we want to get started. I'm kind of your host for the time together. My name is David Ryan Polgar. I'm the founder and director for All Tech is Human. So feel free to reach in touch with both of us. But without further ado, what the format for today is going to be, I'm just going to ask Renee a few questions about her background and her career and how she got there. In addition, I have a bunch of the questions that a few people sent us in earlier. In addition, please use the comment feature. If you're tuning in through YouTube, go to our the chat and just enter your comment. We're going to see some of those, and a few of them are going to appear right on screen, right? So Renee, let's talk a little bit about your background, right? You are an AI ethicist and also a data activist. Tell us a little bit about those roles. What does a AI ethicist do, and how did you get this title as a AI ethicist?
Thank you so much, David. And of course, thank you for always including me in your many projects. It's always an honor to be with you. And, I do consider you one of my mentors. So this is really a nice space to be in. So data activist, I'll start with that. So I am the data activist in residence at the School of Data Science at the University of Virginia. And my work there really looks at what we call bringing the JEDI principle to AI, which is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and really ensuring we bring this conversation to the public space, this conversation about multi-stakeholderism, this conversation about civil society being involved in the design and the development and deployment of new and emerging technologies, the conversation about responsible tech, principled tech, AI we can trust. So data activism really is about bringing the requisite levels of advocacy and evangelism to the question of data, and understanding that we've got to challenge the data infrastructure, the power, the privilege, and the politics behind data, and how we deploy data-driven systems in society, and questions of techno-solutionism and techno-determinism, and how we really could really design a people's manifesto, if you want to put it that way, to the ways in which we think about new and emerging technologies such as AI, and the ways in which we protect society at the same time where we are promoting, the power, the potential, and the extraordinary possibilities of new and emerging technologies. AI ethics really is about that understanding that we've got to deploy technology with an ethical frame of mind. Within AI ethics, I speak a lot about ethical resilience and ethical vigilance that's required to ensure that we deploy technology again on society, understanding the power of an algorithm, understanding algorithmic decision making, and something that is so developmental and transformational, something that can save lives and improve lives, can also hurt and destroy lives, and understanding that we've got to introduce concepts such as accountability and transparency and accuracy and explainability, because this technology is still so opaque, and understanding of fairness and how bias and discrimination could undermine access to this technology, and why we need voice and visibility, and to bring access to underrepresented and unrepresented groups, or why we need to have an ethical thinking about the ways in which we deploy AI and new and emerging technologies in our high needs communities, and whether or not we are using this technology to empower or disempower, to give people the opportunity to generate wealth and to really design their own algorithmic futures, or are we using this technology in ways in which we are just creating wealth for a small group? So AI ethics is really about ensuring we can develop ethical data scientists and ethical designers, and it's also about AI policy and AI governance and AI leadership.
So I'm seeing a few questions come in, and then again, this is a Ask Me Anything. So we're going to get any type of question that people might have, Renee, to find out a little bit more about your background. But to give us a little bit of start before we throw in some of those questions, what's your own background, and how did you get to where you are today?
Certainly. So I began my career as a journalist, and I started working in print, working in a newspaper. And then I went into broadcasting and I became a broadcast journalist. And while I was doing that, I decided that I wanted to get into sportscasting because there were so very few women involved in sports media. And I did that for some time. And then that really involved into public relations, because I sort of flipped the script a bit, and I moved from journalism into public relations and government relations and publicity. And while I was doing that, I was actually using that career to pay my way through grad school. Mm-hmm. To really start studying, and this is where I really started. I started with substance abuse therapy, and for many long days and nights, I worked in a therapeutic community in New York on Randall's Island, and my work was looking at ways in which we could really help people rehabilitate and re-enter society, and that took me into criminology. And while I was studying criminology, I also started to study terrorism, and I got a joint master's there in terrorism studies and criminology, and worked as a criminologist for about 15 years. The focus of my work was homicide investigation, reducing gun and gang violence, and ways in which, again, we could ensure there is a more humanistic approach to the ways in which we deal with crime. And I'm committed to therapeutic jurisprudence, which means the law must always have a therapeutic possibility attached to it. And it is my work in criminology and working with these risk assessment tools and working in recidivism and looking at how these risk assessment tools were deciding who was a risk and who was not a risk, and who we should grant bail to and who we should keep behind bars, and looking at the deployment of these risk assessment tools within a juvenile setting. And it made me realize that something wasn't right here. Something just was not right, where we keep overestimating the risks of Black and brown defendants, or we kept over-policing the same communities with predictive policing, something that I would lecture extensively about. And that's when I decided, as I told you before, I just invited myself to the AI party, and I said, wait a minute, we need these interdisciplinary teams to really think about the ways in which we are procuring these technologies to use in the criminal justice system. And we can't be using these opaque technologies to deliver, life and liberty decisions, these high-stake decision-making, and just realizing that we needed to get criminologists more involved in data science and data scientists to understand criminology when they're designing these tools. And I just started to speak and speak and speak and speak. And I think that's how
Well, the
I
question I'm going
got
to
the
ask,
title.
well, I love it, but the question you're going to ask is you mentioned the phrase that you invited yourself to this AI ethics party, right? So I'm kind of imagining this visualization that it's like you see this AI ethics party going on, a lot of people are talking about important issues, and you're sitting there saying, wait a minute, I should be part of this happening because I have a lot of value that I can add, especially like you mentioned with your own background. So the question I have, because this is what we get a lot with All Tech is Human, especially for our Slack group, anybody who wants to join, you go to bit.ly Responsible Tech Slack, and we have about 1,500 people on there right now. And the question that comes up over and over is, well, how did you pave that way? Because obviously right now you can have a great title, you can talk about what you do, but we know that path wasn't easy. If you're paving it yourself, what were some of your learnings from that, right? How were you able to do this? Was this just a lot of moxie that you have? Was this a lot of determination? Was there a lot of back and forth, or was there something that you could take away? You mentioned a lot of speaking, so I'm curious to dig into that too, of whether that has been advantageous to your pathway as well.
I think it has been. One of the things about me is that I'm really passionate about justice, and I'm very passionate about equity. And if there's justice and there is equity, there has got to be diversity and inclusion. And for me, it has always been innovation, because innovation is critical to criminal justice and law enforcement. Innovation is critical to life. And I always said, I started to read so much about AI, and the more I became passionate about using the technology or deploying the technology to transform and to really change our lives, I became equally passionate about the justice issues. And I said to myself, if no one's saying it, I'm going to say it, whether or not that meant one person is going to listen to me or 100 people are going to listen to me. From my background in media, I had that understanding and appreciation is all you need to get is one good person to listen to you and create the platform that is required. And I was able to get that maybe about 2 years ago on a trip to South Africa, where I spoke at the University of Johannesburg and the University of Cape Town, and really across many platforms in South Africa. And I think I got a lot of media around what I was speaking about, because 2 years ago, very few people were speaking about the challenges of predictive policing, or how we really need to rethink using the kind of research that was already out there by Joy Bulambini and Timna Jabru and Deborah Raji, and really voicing that research in a way that was understandable. Because when you start to talk AI, people sort of pull back because it's like, what are you talking about? We're just not there yet. But I think one of the most critical things I do is really tell a story and pull people into that story. And I think people started to listen, and more people started to invite me to speak, because I think my perspective was at that moment something very fresh. I try to keep it fresh, but it's really about not holding back and really believing for me that there is no time but the right time, which is always now, to step up.
Well, you've also hit on some really important kind of key areas of how you built your career. So for example, when you mentioned going to South Africa, I couldn't help but think that's a strategy that a lot of times people do to grow their career. Specifically, if you look at the music industry, where a bunch of years ago with the Strokes, or even earlier than that, if you look at how Jimi Hendrix, an American, became popular, it wasn't in America. He went over to the UK, did a lot of media over there, amplifies that when he goes back over, and then all of a sudden America loves him, right? So yeah, that same idea. But I'm going to start bringing in a couple questions that we have from a few people participating. So Dwight Nelson is asking, what skill sets would be important for someone like yourself who wants to get into AI ethics? So are there any skill sets that you're seeing that you could tease out?
Definitely. I think for it begins with that understanding of why an ethical approach is required. I think you've got to also come with that level of advocacy and activism. I think it's also an appreciation for understanding the ethics of design. So if you work in data science, or if you work in any sort of field where there is design for new and emerging technologies, it's also that understanding that there's something bigger than us. There's something bigger than the design. There's something bigger than the algorithm. There's that just general respect for humanity. From a data science perspective, I think what we're seeing right now is just about every institution starting to introduce big data ethics and AI ethics and data ethics to the curriculum. So it's there. I think that you begin with that skill set for me of being intellectually curious and understanding what are the long-term impacts of this technology, and understanding that where it has this extraordinary potential to create the greatest possibilities and partnerships we have ever seen, it also has that potential to undermine some of the things that we have fought for centuries. And it comes with that basic skill set, I think, sometimes we think of skills, is it this, is it an MBA, is it, no, I think of passion as a skill.
And do you think that these types of ideas, like you said, you're intellectually curious, right? So you're always going to be, as we kind of talked about with All Tech is Human, you're actually looking for problems as opposed to just always solving them, right? In order to solve a problem, you have to know that there's an initial one. Do you think this is something that today more employers, especially in the tech industry, are looking for, or do you think we're still kind of early on? I'm curious about your own self, how you were able to promote your own unique skill sets and to make that attractive, for example, with your recent position as the data activist in residence at the University of Virginia.
Certainly. I think it's about, for me, I have a very strong communications and crisis communication and risk management background. So I think every opportunity I got to step into the C-suite or have those conversations with leaders, I dealt with the risks of AI, which is the first premise in the C-suite. But then I took that conversation beyond the risks to the rights and understanding why we really need to go beyond the black box, go beyond the inputs and the outputs, and really embrace a kind of thinking that focuses on civil liberties, or beginning that conversation where there's understanding that, data rights is probably or is going to be the civil rights movement of this generation. And it's also, David, about really, just stepping forward. And I think it's something that we wait for the moment. I believe in creating the moment. You could never get the right moment, but just use now. And I always say, from wherever you stand or wherever you sit, you can lead. And that leadership begins by saying, I'm going to do this the right way.
Yeah. Well, that's still the visual that I have in my head right now, is that nobody said, Renee, we want to invite you to the AI ethics party. You actually bust through the door and say, hey, I'm here. You need me in your party. And then there you go. And the rest is now becoming kind of history. But I want to dig in a little bit, because obviously you do a ton of speaking, and you mentioned your own speaking leading to some of these opportunities to grow your career. So for anyone watching, how did you go about doing that? Because I got to say, we're connected on LinkedIn. Every day I see that you're speaking somewhere else. I'm like, how many Renee Cummings are there? I don't know if you have a doppelganger, or maybe like a John King CNN type of hologram that goes up that speaks for you, or if you are speaking like you are today, pretty much all the time. So you seem to be very busy with that. How did you go about building your kind of speaking career?
Well, first, I started just speaking to people who wanted to hear me. And many times those were nonprofit organizations or small groups or students. And I think students were the ones who always excited me the most, because I would always be so shocked. Where did they find me? How did they know that they wanted me to be a part of this conversation? And it really is about embracing these opportunities. And I think for me, once I have the time, I'm willing to commit that time. And I believe it's important for us to have the conversation because so much of what is required to build responsible tech begins with conversations. And conversations in small spaces lead to conversations in bigger spaces because someone from that conversation could go and have a conversation with someone else. So I speak to students, and a student may go home, and that student may have a mother who is leading a tech company or who's leading HR in another organization, and then has the conversation with their parent, or with their teacher. So that's how my speaking, engagement started to expand, and more different people were engaging me, and all saying that, we want to hear your perspective on this. We think it is important, but we also like the way in which you deliver the content and the ways in which you bring us into the conversation as well.
All right, I'm going to bring on another question. We have a bunch that I'm going to try to bring in. I know this one's a long question, so it's taking up our faces. So we'll have to take it off pretty soon. But it's from a LinkedIn user. We're now on LinkedIn. How do you see combining justice, gender equality, AI ethics, tech responsibility, along with all of this? Do you see we can help ourselves in terms of environment as well? I do understand I am trying to mix a lot of areas, but they are all connected with each other, as I see. And then also tack on, you are amazing, Renee. So thank you for that kind shout out. But where I'm going to take that question is, you combine a lot of different backgrounds. That question is asking, how do you combine justice, gender equality, AI ethics, responsible tech, right? Your own background in journalism and communications, you're combining a lot of this. How do you think you've been able to do that? For anybody who's watching and building this career, it seems like a lot of these people working in the space, like yourself, kind of have an amalgamation of different talents that they're able to weave together, maybe in that narrative story. So where do you see all these areas of justice, gender equality? Where do you see that bleeding into your work in AI ethics?
Certainly. I think I really do have a very strong interdisciplinary background. And I think what AI ethics is demanding of us now is that interdisciplinary background to create the interdisciplinary teams to topple what we call the design monoculture, and to really bring diversity and equity and inclusion into the space. And I will say this, where there is justice, there is equity. Where there is equity, there is diversity and inclusion. And where there is inclusion, we are looking at gender, we are looking at sexuality, we are looking at geography, we are looking at access, we are looking at age, we are just looking at everything else. And if we want to design ethical technology or innovate with intent, then justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion has got to be a part of the mix. I think an interdisciplinary background really brings a richness in the experience that I offer. I have a very multicultural perspective to the way things are supposed to happen, particularly when it comes to creating those requisite levels of intellectual confrontation that's required in the design space, and really about challenging people's thinking and really asking the kinds of questions that often make us uncomfortable, but the questions that are required to ensure we design responsible tech. So it all comes together very nicely. It's like you're making a stew or a pot of soup. You put all these ingredients together, and then you get this fantastic thing that doesn't look like all the separates, but tastes absolutely fantastic.
I'm going to go with that analogy, right? So like a major would be just like a slice of bread, or like you have like a scone or a croissant, right? You're choosing a major. Whereas what you're saying is, hey, we need like a minestrone soup of all these different ingredients that you mix them together, and it's this kind of mixture. But the question that comes up a lot that I want to dig into is the problem, at least from my perspective, is that, especially since we deal with a lot of college students, grad students, professionals, career changers, is that as much as you're mentioning kind of a transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, or anti-disciplinary type of approach that can be attractive, college students are still entering mostly a space where they go to college or university, and it says, what major do you want? What track do you want? This seems to be a natural tension, because here we are saying with AI ethics that you need to have such a mixture. You need to have the social side and the tech side. So you need to have kind of this balance of the fuzzy and the techie, so to speak. So what advice would you have for college students and grad students? Because they're choosing a major that might not necessarily offer them that kind of transdisciplinary type of exposure. Is it about upskilling or other certification programs they could take, or what do you imagine?
Well, I think the beauty of being in college at this moment is that everything is data driven. And any profession that you are planning to enter requires an understanding of data, understanding of evidence-based approaches, and understanding of empirical approaches. So I think when you look at what's being offered in universities at the moment, there's a lot of data science, there's a lot of data ethics, a lot of digital ethics, and ways in which we need to bring a sociological and psychological perspective to the ways in which we do technology. So you're seeing combinations, neuroscience and AI. You're seeing combinations that look at bioethics and data ethics. So we're seeing all these great combinations in the many careers that are being created at the moment. So I think it's, again, about being intellectually curious and just adding a few extra things to the mix, just to sort of spice up that degree, to ensure that when you exit academia and enter the world, you are entering with qualifications that are still relevant and that will continue to be relevant. If you want to upskill when it comes to data ethics, there are many free courses online. The University of Helsinki has a great one with data ethics, and I think the University of Seattle, there are several that universities that have these free online courses that you can take, just to give you, a nice sort of understanding of what AI ethics is about, and really how you could find your way in there.
When you think about your own education, what classes, or was there anything that you think has stood out by now in hindsight? You say, well, that was actually really important that I was exposed to that. What do you think you've been able to weave in today that you learned yesterday that was now incredibly important?
It's not a class in particular, but I think it's about staying intellectually curious.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also about critical thinking, which is so important, because when there is critical thinking, there are creative solutions. As well as, I would say to you, my work as a criminologist has helped me within the realm of AI ethics, because I just have a passion for interrogating and for investigating. And I think this is what brought me to data activism, that ability to get behind the data and really travel through the memory of the data and really ask questions about these data sets that we're using, historical data sets, the challenges of these data sets, and something that I'm very passionate about when it comes to AI and data, which is looking at the ways in which we are how we transmit intergenerational trauma through data and through algorithms by not really understanding the negative impacts of historic data, or using historic data to build a new technology, which is really undermining that ability to build, to use this technology to build a better tomorrow, if you want to put it like that.
Well, I do want to put it like that. We are trying to build a better tomorrow and co-create a tech future that aligns up with our civil liberties and the public interest at large. And I guess another question I would have with that is, obviously, I mean, you talk about a narrative, but your narrative has to have a lot of bumps along the way. What did you do? Because I'm sure, like, here you are kind of creating your own career. Like you said, you wanted to get into the party, you got into the party. What did you do to get over some of the hurdles? Were there ever times where you're saying, all right, it doesn't seem like people are getting my perspective that I'm bringing? Is there something that you kind of went back and did? Because it seems like that's a lot of what we're dealing with at Ethicist Human is really kind of like resilience resilience to kind of move forward.
You're quite correct. And when I speak about specializing in therapeutic jurisprudence, much of that work and much of the work that I have done in criminal psychology has been within the realm of resilience. And how do we help individuals build back? And how do we help individuals rehabilitate and re-enter? So I think that background in psychology helps me at many times when I feel that, things may not be working. And when it's not working, I always sit and try to think about what could I change? What could I improve? Is it I'm trying to go through a door and I really need to knock on a window? It really is always about rethinking and restructuring, and something I think I do very well, which is reimagining and always reinventing myself. And I think it is because I am forever a student. I am forever engaged in the learning process. I am always desirous of learning more, and always believing there's something else that I need to learn. And once I learn this, I need to share it. So knowledge sharing is also critical for me, capacity building, and really ensuring that there are others who, can really take the baton and move with it. So it really is about resilience. And yes, there have been many times where I've had to reassess, rethink, reimagine, reinvent, recreate,
A lot of re's.
That's what my name means, Renee, right?
Yeah.
It means reborn,
Yeah.
Renaissance. So I think I'm always in that process of redefining, and it's very healthy. It is very healthy because more and more we're realizing that careers and education cannot be static. They have got to be dynamic and be flexible. And that's what learning is about. It's not being stuck in a major or being stuck in a degree, but it's about using that knowledge to do something different, using that knowledge to really enhance lives.
That's one of the questions and comments that I'm going to bring up right now. Individual wondering about working in AI ethics for a big private corporation. Would you say that data privacy is the field that today presents the best chances to achieve a job in responsible tech, or would you go to what you were saying earlier, that it needs to have a certain flexibility? I mean, what have you learned? Like, are you always kind of on the lookout for how are people, like the nomenclature, how people are talking about these terms, and then adjusting your kind of CV and overall kind of branding on that, or what do you think?
I think data privacy is a great way to get in there, because there's this big conversation now about data privacy and security, and conversations about informed consent, which are critical, and the ways in which we must create opportunities for participative design, and the ways in which we must ensure technoscience is a caring science. So definitely data privacy is a great way to enter a corporate space, and really an excellent way in which to engage AI ethics or data activism across a broader spectrum.
So here's another, we have a couple good comments that we want to bring in. And then we have about like 12 minutes before we have to say goodbye, but hopefully people can stay in touch with some of your incredible work, Renee. So question deals with what distinguishes an ethicist from an activist?
I will say an ethicist, an AI ethicist, knows the work that needs to be done. The data activist gets the work done. So I combine both of them.
I like that. So it's because that question was also getting into the fact that, you're an AI ethicist, but also a data activist. So you say it's the kind of the knowledge meets the ability, right? Because I imagine that's a misnomer that people have. Like, you read so many think pieces on, oh, wait, are there a bunch of just ethicists laying around, scratching their chin, as opposed to, hey, AI is affecting how we live, love, learn, even die. It alters the human existence. There's a lot of real work, a lot of activism that needs to be done in the space. But we do also have a couple very granular types of questions. We received a bunch previous about people who are looking at college programs, grad programs, and PhD programs. So I'll just bring that up. Yeah, so we have people definitely identifying with with you, Renee. So this question is looking at starting a PhD in October, and quote, I will be working on designing a governance structure for algorithmic justice using a human rights-based approach in the UK. I don't know if it's too early, but I am worried about how to get data. Where do you suggest I look? So we do get a lot of questions, right? People are looking for building their own research, grabbing data, but then also even how they do some of their PhD programs. Any thoughts on that?
Sure, there are lots of organizations out there looking at the impact of AI on human rights, looking at the marriage of AI and peacekeeping, looking at the question of AI, democracy, and disinformation. Just the whole concept of AI ethics that thinks about civil liberties and civil rights and the ways in which algorithmic decision making could really undermine those human rights. So there's a lot of data out there and a lot of organizations already gathering the data. And that's why open access is so critical to the work that we're doing. So I think you're going to find some excellent partnerships for your PhD and some excellent avenues for the data. What I would challenge you to always do is deconstruct the data, get behind the data, and understand that if you are using data, you are using that data to design new legacies and to change trajectories. You're just not bringing, old data and using new technology to sort of spread old thinking.
So we have a question from John, who's tuning in from the Netherlands. Does participatory ethics find itself in AI ethics for your clients? If it does, is it through policies, programming design, or is it purely policy and virtue? So we do get a lot of questions on this. It might be kind of alluding to where AI ethics sits. Obviously, always a lot of concerns that people are going to use it for kind of ethics washing, specifically for some of the larger tech companies. So where do you see your work sitting with the state of the design, the work that you do around AI ethics?
Well, I think I see that work doing several things. One, at the moment at UVA, I'm actually lecturing on a big data ethics in the Masters in Data Science, the online program. And in there, you have an amazing group of data scientists and professionals working in the space. And they now are really getting this new kind of understanding and building this kind of consciousness that says, ethical resilience is critical, ethical vigilance is critical, due process, duty of care, and how do these things find their way in my work? That whole question of participatory design, critical to the work of the data scientist. In the C-suite, I'm having conversations about risk. I'm having conversations about crises, and I'm trying to start these conversations around risks to include rights and to include this greater responsibility that we have to humanity. So for me, it's not only the bottom line in the C-suite where the conversation is always, but trying to bring a kind of thinking that says you have a role at the front line as well to ensure we deploy technology that is responsible, that is principled, that is transparent, accountable, that is trustworthy, and really bringing the bottom line to the front line. And I think that is what I try to do.
I like it. I also have a bunch of questions that we received earlier when people were signing up for our time together. One of them was just a very straightforward question talking about how do I read up on AI ethics? And then to add to that question, obviously so much is happening in this area, so many different outlets you can go to. So I think we're just a little curious. How do you yourself stay abreast of all the changes that are happening in this area? Are there newsletters you subscribe to, or people you talk to, or do you have kind of like a database or like a brain trust of people that you lean on? And then for anyone else, what would you recommend that they do if they're trying to extend their career or build their career in this space to always brush up on these issues?
Well, the good thing is there are so many newspaper articles and media stories and on television now. It's such popular culture. So you can get involved just by being part of the media, or just by Googling AI ethics. And of course, there are these free courses that you can do, University of Michigan, University of Montreal, University of Seattle, all of them, ethics, aiethics.org, all of them having courses that you can take. And of course, you can read. There are great books that are out there. Every week, I try to get more reading done. I read some of the academic stuff, I read some of the non academic, but mainly I have conversations with other individuals, my peers, and really trying to stay abreast. It's a lot. I kid you not. It's a lot of information out there, and sometimes you do feel overwhelmed. But it's just try to read one thing every day. And if you do that, I think that's a great start in really building the kind of understanding that's required to just move you forward.
Very well said. And then we have another question that's probably something you get a lot. It's really trying to distill a lot of how you even break into this field, right? So the question really deals with looking at your career as an AI ethicist and a data activist. How do you break into this field? Like if you boil it down, if this was kind of, let's imagine, so now you're at the party, right? So you invited yourself to the party, and somebody at this cocktail party says, Renee, what you do sounds fascinating. I want to do what you do. What advice do you give to them? Or do you say, hey, listen, you're going to have to sit down. This is going to be a long conversation.
You know, what I say is this: know where you are in your career and know what you want to do, in the sense, what is your next step? And if AI ethics is your next step, you can begin, as I said, with volunteering at an organization that looks at AI ethics. Many nonprofits are looking for individuals to engage as part of their research teams. And the more that you get involved with an organization that is dear to your heart, one that you believe in, get involved with All Tech is Human. There's a lot of work happening with David. I know that you're building so many systems, and you're really trying to set the agenda for how we move forward. It's a great place to be. And I know you definitely could do with some extra help to do the kind of work that is required. That's how you get in. It may not be the traditional way of trying to get in. And I'll say this to you. Initially, when I thought about entering AI ethics, I did send my resume to IBM and to many of the big tech companies. Of course, no one ever got back to me. That was that. But I was able to take some non-traditional ways, and now I speak at a lot of big tech events for these same companies who did not find my resume, because I guess my resume wasn't able to, game the algorithms, because at that time I probably didn't put all the things that were required. But now, within 2 years of really speaking and engaging and trying to lift the conversation, I get invited to speak to these executives and these tech leaders. So it may not be, don't always think of the traditional way there. Sometimes the non-traditional way is a more exciting ride.
We also have a question. So I like that, because that comes up a lot. And that's why I kind of followed up about some of your speaking, because it seems like that probably reframed it for a lot of those companies like IBM, who then says, wait a minute, we need somebody like Renee. And you come back and say, well, you skipped over my resume when I sent it over. Oh, they're like, but we love your work, right? So you basically took a different strategy to emphasize your skill set. And I think that's also because some of the companies looking for these positions, they might not necessarily even know yet exactly what they're looking for until they find it, right? So you're almost taking a kind of like a backdoor strategy to extend out the value that you add in something that's not going to be classically maybe valued in a resume or CV. So very interesting to mention that. We also have a couple questions that Marta is sending over, asking about really how do we stay in touch with some of your work? Do you like when people kind of reach out to your on Twitter, LinkedIn? Is there any website you want people
to follow? Any social platform,
Okay.
LinkedIn, Twitter. You can email me. You can check out the School of Data Science website. I'm also there as well. I still have my scholarship at Columbia University, doing great work there in the Community Scholars Program as well. So you can just reach out to me through All Tech is Human as well. Yeah.
I love that. So I want to, again, thank everyone for tuning in, their great comments and questions, and also participating in our very first Ask a Mentor. And Renee, really big thank you for coming on. Again, Renee Cummings, AI ethicist and data activist, talking about how you were able to build the career that you have. So a lot of incredible feedback that you offered today. So please reach out to Renee on Twitter, LinkedIn, stay in touch with all the incredible work, as she mentioned, at the University of Virginia as well. We'll also post this in our upcoming newsletter so you can follow along with some of the great feedback and sources and resources that Renee mentioned. Again, my name is David Ryan Polgar with All Tech is Human. Please stay in touch with us at alltechishuman.org. We also have a Slack. If you go to bit.ly, and then Responsible Tech Slack. Lots of great ways to stay involved. Find the others, find all the people that are trying to build a better tech future. So Renee, thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Take care. Thanks again. Bye-bye.